great. Well, welcome everybody this morning to the general maintenance portion of the MECH guide here, getting ready for a certification. And as if you didn't hear, registration for the September proxy test is August the 11th. You go directly to the MECH website to register for that. And if you're going to the Northern California, which is a great place to be, up here in Fairfield, California, it'll be on. You need to register for that by September the 15th, and that proxy test will be October 20th, as mentioned earlier. Let's kind of jump into this because I really like the topic of general maintenance. It's a very broad topic to say the least, but I wanted to hit a few things in particular that definitely were on some of the practice test questions, which are at the end of this presentation. General maintenance provides broad experience with air, hydraulics, electric, paint, and lubrication. Next slide. And on the general maintenance side of it, a lot of the objectives that they were trying to hit within this presentation, of course, is the gas and arc welding method procedures, air compression operations and troubleshooting, pump operations repairs, alignment and flexible couplers on motors, and how to maintain a packing gland, how to cut and install glass, basic hydraulics, how to paint and use various types of paint products, how to apply anchor systems, general troubleshooting, repair of a wide variety of hospital equipment, OSHA requirements for hand and shop tools, how to repair V-belts and align pulleys, and various aspects of preventive maintenance programs. The last two are how to and when to apply a lubrication. That's a very interesting one. I've learned more about that lately. How to adjust RPM and pulleys in operations. Next slide, please. Candidates who should be coached using the following steps. Now, here's something that I threw in here. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but this is on the test taking methodology. I thought it was worthwhile to throw this in here because it does follow. I've taken a few tests in my tenure, and these are very good tips. I'll say that. Just look through the entire test before starting. Kind of skim through it. Don't read it in detail, but just kind of look through it. Relate to the number of questions and the time allotted. So, you've got 100 questions and you've got 100 minutes, it's a minute per question, kind of take that into consideration. Note where pictures, charts, graphs are located. Note how the sections are arranged. That's a good thing. And look for the easy sections or questions to start with. Check the answer sheet often to ensure your answers are placed in the corresponding answer location. I've had the nightmare of I'm answering a multiple choice and realized I skipped one and now I've answered incorrectly for the last 5 questions. So I missed that. Don't leave any questions blank. Make sure that your count is also incorrect. All right, next slide. Multiple choice or multiple guess. Unlike many questions on this particular test, make sure that you answer each one. There's no trick to it. There's no pattern to it. Question, don't mark it as A all the time if you don't know the answer. Usually your best first guess is the correct answer. You can do, of course, a process of elimination on it, and I think that's worthwhile tips. You can read through this later. This will be posted, but I think it's worthwhile for you to just keep this in mind as you take this test and other tests going forward. Next slide, please. The structure, and I thought about this quite a bit because there's different sizes, and they'll talk about this. This is a possible thing on the test. For top management, goals or budget, right? And depending on the size of the facility that you're in, and also the structure that it has, you'll have questions that may relate to management positions and what those are. The manager's position may be maintenance planning and scheduling, developing key performance indicators, inventory, training, supervising, developing standard operating procedures, checklists, managing vendors and contracts. I think this is important. A lot of manager positions are having more and more of this. And of course, then the blue collar worker level, which I spent a lot of time at early in my career, executing the PMs and repairs, installing and upgrading equipment, cleaning the equipment, and making sure the facility there. Keep this in mind when you kind of look through this, and know that the test questions are kind of broad and they can involve all of this, as we go through it. Next slide, please. I like this slide for a couple of reasons. It's a visual, and it does bring back home to look at upper left there is, temperature, so the HVAC system, the carpenter shop, the electrical shop, grounds in the bottom left corner, plumbing shop, and the painting shop. So it used to that decade or two ago, a lot of healthcare facilities had different shops that actually provided this. Large facilities may still have that. So keep that in mindset as we break this test up into the general components. Next slide, please. I used this slide in the plumbing section there, and I thought it was pretty good because it does paint the different environments in which we provide general maintenance throughout a hospital. From water treat to food service to the lobby, general public areas, wastewater facilities. And a lot of times, people say, well, I don't have a wastewater facility at my hospital, but in reality, you have parts of that, which are those components that are within before it goes into the main sewer. Dialysis as well, that can be very unique on plumbing and general maintenance, and also with the operating room as well. When you look at general maintenance, think about how you would have to dress in different attires, the different tools that you would use for these different areas of this one single building. You have a lot of different aspects of your job for general maintenance. Next slide, please. Benefits of a work order system. I know a lot of you, the adage may be that, why would I have a work order system? You just tell me what you need to do and I can go do that. Why do I need to record it? And, as more and more of us understand compliance, if it's not documented, it never happened, right? Well, the work order system, it really has more aspects to it and benefits than ever known before. So it is a centralization of information, and it also better resource allocation. So, if you have more plumbing calls and you do carpenter calls, you may need more of a plumber than you do a carpenter. But at the same time, it helps your allocation of workload. It keeps everyone in the loop. It, provides information throughout. The work order system also is a great report and analysis tool, like I mentioned earlier. And it keeps assets in good condition, meaning that it's not forgotten, it's put there. And it's become more of a central depository location for information throughout. As normally it's referred to as a computerized maintenance management system, or CMMS. And it is now being focused on more, I think, by Joint Commission when we're looking at a virtual survey. So it has a very key importance to our general maintenance strategy. Next slide, please. I threw this up here for types of punch, and you'll understand why I did this a little bit later. You think, well, what's a center punch? What's that used for? A pin punch. What's that used for? A starter punch, a punch, alignment punch, and some have variations to the names, but there is a variety of punches that are used in general maintenance. And if you think of a skyscraper, going up, how do you align to put the bolt in? Well, there you go. You got an alignment punch or a grip pin that you're putting in place to align for those bolt holes. Next, please. Hydraulic systems. This is something that's mentioned that will be in general maintenance. How do you explain a hydraulic system to folks? How does that work, right? Well, this is a pretty good a way of looking at it. If you look at the very left side there where you talk about a force applied, you're applying 100 kilograms in a 10 centimeter diameter cylinder. It can, exert the 1,000 kilograms in a 100 centimeter area. So if you think about it's area, not diameter, but area. And if you think about that, what is the trade-off for that increase in lift is actually the distance, right? So you're going to move that plunger 10 centimeters down on the left to apply the force, and it's only 1 centimeter raise on the opposite side. So that's how hydraulics work. It's a good general analogy to keep in mind, and so that this is something that is supposedly on the test, and we'll see that maybe a little later. Next, please. I like this one because I had to explain this quite a bit a lot of times early in my career. This is misalignments and alignments of belts and shafts. So if you look at the far left here, you see a misalignment of the shafts to where that they're not parallel with each other. That's one type of misalignment. And if you look at the second one, where you actually have a twisting of the shaft, right? That's another misalignment. The third one is a misalignment to where they're in parallel, but they're not at the same distance out, so they're not in alignment. And of course, the fourth one over there is showing what it does look like in alignment. So in alignment, in the early stages, we used to use a lot of what they call straight edge, and some may still use that as a straight bar to align the pulleys that are on the shafts there. A lot more so anymore is that we're using laser alignment tool to align these shafts to make sure that the belts are in alignment, and belt tensions and everything to make sure that you may have one shaft be the fan and the other shaft may be the motor that's driving that. And so you want to make sure that those are in alignment, or you'll have excessive belt wear and definitely early failure of that piece of equipment. Next, please. This is a packing gland. So if you open up a pump, I don't know how many have done this yet. I try to make sure that when I do a presentation, I do not assume that people have done all of this. I may be speaking to a fantastic painter, but has never touched a pump. So if you look at a pump, a lot of pumps have what they call packing glands. Those are packing glands. There's 4 of them in there on this particular pump. It has a ring in it, and the packing gland is put in place. That actually is the seal. There's no leak in there. Next, please. And this is one of my favorites. So I started off doing gas and arc welding at 12 years old. That was my 12-year-old birthday. Was an arc welder. But I'll talk about gas welding first. Gas welding techniques and parts of the welding torch and the working of gas welding, the different types of welding, the different types of flame in a gas welding. So you will see most common, which I used to use, was what they call arc-acetylene, which is oxygen and acetylene mixture to perform gas welding. So you heat the metal up, and you'll have a third rod which will be used to melt with those. So if you have 2 pieces of metal you're trying to put together, you heat those up and also heat the welding rod itself to where there's a fusion between the 2 pieces of metal and the rod itself. So that's a good one there. If you notice on the left, they show the nice exhaust hood that can go over that to make sure to get rid of the smoke in the welding area. You always want to make sure that you have personal protection equipment on, and also the area is pretty much fireproof, when you're doing gas welding. Next slide, please. So a comparison between arc welding and gas welding. As I mentioned earlier about the gas welding with the torch and the welding of a joint that's formation, the gas welding, or the arc welding, I should say, is one of the earlier forms that we use. A lot of people talk about TIG welding and others, but I wanted to hit arc welding as the basics. That you have a welding machine, which is basically taking, it's plugged into an outlet. It could be 110, 220, but you're taking two pieces of metal. You're connecting it with a grounding cable, and you have an electrode holder and electrode that you're using to make this arc. It goes through it. The success of this comes with a lot of practice. A lot of people what we call strike and arc. You'll strike it, come across it, and strike it to get the first part of the burn. Then you'll make sure that you're hitting both pieces of metal equally, and to make that fusion occur, and working your way down. When you get down, it should look like plates in a dish strainer. If you do a little dishwashing like I do, and laying slides side by side through there, you've got a great weld. On the gas welding side of it, you'll use flux in addition to the welding rod to make that seal. What's sealing preventing the oxidation on the arc side is the flux that's being burnt off. As it goes through there, it actually keeps the molten metal from oxidizing. And the same way that you'll use for your welding rod, you'll use a flux material, which is in addition to this, you'll dip the rod in. Next slide, please. For electrical, right? So for the electrician, a day in the life of electrician, you'll have safety using power tools, some of the training, planning for the installation, troubleshooting electrical problems, and installing electrical systems. You can't get any, as we mentioned earlier about having the right personal protective equipment. It's the same way with the electrician, to make sure that you're safe, make sure that your equipment is safe, that you're using to perform the different duties. I'll show you a little bit more on the advanced side of that here shortly. The next slide, please. This is a couple folks that are doing some electrical switchgear work, and if you notice, the protective equipment they have there is much greater than what you may normally see out there. But they're actually what we call racking a breaker. They're taking a breaker out, and he's cranking it right there. They have their safety distance out. They got their arc flash suits on. The testing of that PPE is extensive. We inflate it, make sure there's no leaks in it. But electricity can definitely kill you very quickly and easily. So you want to make sure that you have all your PPE in place and know what you're doing before you do it. The education is important. That's why there's a lot of certifications in that. But in general, maintenance mechanics should not be, just doing, pulling a breaker. So you'll have electricians that are doing that. Next, please. I like this one myself. I think I should have had this a few decades ago. I've always said I was one of the worst painters out there, but I'm getting better over time. The main thing when it comes to painting, and I've talked to a lot of painters to try to perfect my skill set, is that you want to clear the room. No shortcuts. Clear the room if possible. Use the tape everything off. Take the outlet covers off, please, and light switch plates off. Make sure you're safe in that as well. Roll from the top down, and of course, if you end up with a run, you can catch it as it's running down. If you're going from the top down, use a brush to get to the corners and edges and areas close to the outlets and light switches. Make sure that apply a second coat and immediately remove the tape. Waiting for the paint to dry can result in peeling. So you don't want to leave the paint on too long. The tapes now are a little bit better than they used to be, but if you leave them on too long, they used to would dry up, and you'd have more of a mess due to the tape drying than you would leaving it off there, taking it off early. The other part is clean up. Make sure you clean up afterwards. You know, a good paintbrush is not cheap. So clean up your equipment, clean up your area, and do a nice, neat, clean job when you're doing general painting. Next slide, please. I like this one. As an engineer, you know, if I try to teach someone, you know, what is a frequency, right? And so frequency is like how often something happens, right? Well, yeah, that's true. But here's 3 cycles which happen in 1 second. So it's a frequency of 3 cycles per second. And what they're talking about can be several things, right? It could be electrical sine wave for AC current. But in this case, I really wanted to show this illustration when we talk about sound pulses, right? What's vibration, right? What's a vibration cycle? And here's 3 cycles per second on a vibration. So that if you were to feel or sense something, 3 cycles per second, you'll feel a little bit of vibration, right? But that's what it is. That's what it actually looks like if we charted it. You know, something was swinging from right to left. Think of it that way. That could be a cycle when it gets back. Next slide, please. So now we kind of get into the general maintenance questions, right? And now it'll kind of make more sense why I picked a lot of those topics ahead of this. If you have a bolt hole that is not aligned with threads, what tool would you use to align the hole, right? So think about, you got 2 pieces you're trying to align before you put a bolt through it. What tool would you use? The next question is fluids used to move mechanical parts are called what, right? And the answer is, I should say. Next slide, please. It's a drift pin. A drift punch, right? So a drift punch is, if you remember, look at those punches up there, they show one that's used for alignment, but a drift punch is one that's used quite a bit to align bolt holes to make sure that you can bolt a piece of equipment together. Fluid used to move mechanical parts are called hydraulics, right? It's hydraulic oil, but it's hydraulics, right? So it can be a lot of different pieces of that as well. Next slide, please. Tools used to measure the distance of a cylinder moves is what, right? And so they give cylinder distance, travel distance, hydraulic gauge, pressure gauge, or a tape measure. And just kind of think this through, visualize what they're asking you, and it'll make more sense when I give you the answer. 49 is a bolt has broken off flush, right? It's broken off flush. And needs to come out. What's the first steps you're going to do, right? Are you going to use the center punch? Are you going to drill a hole in the bolt? Measure the bolt, or use an extractor? What would you do first? And I'll explain that. An old belt can be removed from a pulley by cutting the belt, prying the belt off the pulley, loosening the motor mounts, or all of the above. And the answer is, next slide, please. Use a tape measure, right? So what tool to measure the distance a cylinder moves? It's not a hydraulic gauge that's measuring that's not a pressure gauge, it's not measuring hydraulic pressure, it could be. But a tape measure measures distance, right? So it's distance. And I know I told you earlier it's not a trick question, but a lot of these you have to visualize what they're asking. And sometimes it's actually very simplistic. The bolt is broken off flush. Needs to come out. What's the first steps? Well, you're going to have to use a center punch. You have to use a center punch before you try to drill a hole in the bolt. You can measure it, but that's not the first step if you're trying to get it out. Last step is you're going to use that extractor, and then you got to measure, see what size bolt it is you're going to replace it with, right? So that's the first step. Use a center punch. Question 50, and the old belt can be removed from the pulley. You're not going to salvage the old belt. So cutting it off or prying the belt off the pulley, loosening the motor mounts, all of those are ways to remove the belt. I prefer actually cutting the belt off. But next slide, please. To remove a pulley that is stuck on a shaft, the mechanic should do what? And so the question, possible answers are: drive it off with a hammer, twist it off with a chain wrench, cut the shaft, or heat the pulley. Okay. Which of the following typically costs more when doing a repair is made? Personal time, number of parts, special tools, time to read technical literature. 53 is loose carpet can be repaired with nails, glue, screws, or bolts. And the answer is, next slide, to remove it, heat the pulley. Right. So if you've got a pulley that's on a shaft, heat the pulley up. Why? The reason you're heating it up is it expands, and so the diameter of the pulley then becomes greater than the diameter of the shaft. Right, much greater. When it heats up, it expands, so it's easier to remove the pulley. 52 says which of the following typically costs more when a repair is made? It's actually your time, believe it or not. The number of parts, specialty tools, reading the technical literature. A lot of times, if you look at repair cost, it's becoming more and more the labor piece of it. Loose carpet can be repaired, and this one I want you to think about. Carpet can be laid on, floor, a wooden floor. It could be laid on tile. It could be laid on concrete slab, and if it's all different areas that you could do this, but most of the time, carpet can be repaired with glue. They just glue it back down, and that makes the glue seamed, but butting it up, it also putting it back down into the location. So I think that's definitely you would. We talked about test-taking techniques. If you looked at this, you aren't going to bolt down carpet. You're not going to use screws, but you could either nail it down or glue it down. But what would be the most useful way? It's definitely glue, because you may not be able to nail it down to concrete slab. Next slide, please. This one here says the temperature recording paper needed to be replaced can be where? Is it sterilizer? Is it dietary equipment, electrical control panels, or office equipment? 55, which of the following is true for oxygen supply systems and components? And is it, pressure test before using? Is it clean to eliminate residual oxygen? Paint red to indicate high pressure? Scrub once per month for bacteria. The main purpose of lubrication is reduce friction and wear, allow the moving parts to roll rather than slide, keep the machinery cool, prevent rust and corrosion and contamination. Next slide, please. The answers are: for a temperature recording paper is needed for the sterilizers. For general maintenance workers, if you go down to your sterilizing equipment, you'll see a paper used to record the temperatures that are used in sterilizers. They have to meet a certain temperature to record that they are reaching the temperature needed for the sterilization. 55, which of the following is true for oxygen supply systems? And kind of remember, so if you're a general maintenance worker, you may not be working on a carpenter, you may not be working on the oxygen system, but just by process of elimination, which of the following is true for oxygen systems? Well, you wouldn't paint to indicate high pressure, right? So that's something different. Scrub once per month for bacteria. You're not scrubbing, the oxygen supply system for that. So clean to eliminate residual oxygen. Well, it's got oxygen in it, so that's not it. So by process of elimination, it's pretty easy that it's a pressure test before using it. You want to make sure there's no leaks in the oxygen system. Let's see, 55, 56 is the main purpose of lubrication. I mentioned this early on. I like this part of it. It says to reduce friction and wear. If you, by elimination, it allows moving parts to roll rather than slide. Well, not necessarily. Sometimes we use lubrication to make things slide. Keep the machinery cool. Yes, that's true. But it also, we want to make sure we're reducing friction, because the friction actually is what can generate heat, but we also don't want it to have wear. Prevents rust and corrosion. Yeah, that's true, but it does in contamination. Not necessarily. It can keep things out, but the main purpose of it is to reduce friction and wear. Next slide, please. Before welding, cast metal should be, it says clean, preheat, flux, pre-chill. Question 58 is purpose for flux and flux coating rod is to remove rust, prevent oil from penetrating the metal, seal the metal surface, remove the contaminants at the point of weld. Number 59 is successful maintenance techniques practice. Use use their tools with their meters, good etiquette, or lifelong learning strategies. Next slide, please, for the answers. It is preheat for cast iron. You want to make sure you heat that up. The problem with cast is it'll shrink very quickly. Once it cools quickly. That's why we use cast for a lot of engine blocks. Cools very quickly, and so you need to preheat it before you start doing the welding. It's very, very difficult to weld cast metal. I can tell you that. The purpose of flux and flux coating on rods, we talked about this earlier, is it removes and prevents contamination at the point of weld. It actually seals it up for oxidation as well, but you need to remove the flux itself in the rods on there, moves and prevents the contamination at the point of the weld. 59. Successful maintenance technicians practice lifelong learning strategies. That's something that definitely you're doing that today. You're learning more. You're expanding your knowledge, hopefully, and ready to do your next certification test here as well. The next slide, please. Maintenance work consists of PMs, unscheduled work, specialty work, or all of the above. 61 is official name for the documentation that directs work to be done within a facility is a work order, an invoice, a ticket, or directive. 62, work that is before the system breaks down is called expedient repairs, unscheduled maintenance, corrective repairs, or predictive maintenance. Next slide, please, with the answers. 60 is all of the above. Maintenance work consists of PMs, unscheduled work, and specialty work. If you think about how those PMs, how the maintenance work is delivered to you, it comes in different format, different time frames of those as well, and to be completion times. And so especially work may be a project that takes, a few months, where a PM is something that may need to be done within the hour, within a few hours if it's urgent. If you look at the next question here, the official name of the documentation that directs work to be done in a facility is a work order. And that's why they call it a work order system, right? A lot of times. And 62, work that before a system breaks down is called preventive maintenance. So you're preventing something from happening by taking care of that equipment ahead of time, right? You're not reacting to something, you're actually preventing it, you're maintaining it before it breaks down, and to extend the life of the equipment. Next slide, please. Rubber spring straps, rubber pads, and other things that can be applied to a device is vibrating. These things are generally known as vibration eliminators, home device, noise reducers, and sound stoppers. Okay. Vibration is measured in FPMs, IBMs, CPS, or RPMs, right? And 65, sound created by a piece of equipment is measured in what? Frequency, waves, decibels, or cycles per second. And next slide, please, with the answers. Vibration eliminators, huh? So the rubber spring straps and pads, the devices that are vibrating, these things are generally known as vibration eliminators. And you can see a lot of different shapes and sizes. Companies make a lot of different ones used for mounting motors and stuff. And a lot of times you'll see it like even like a washer that's put in there that has eliminators. Vibration is measured in what? And it is CPS, cycles per second. Remember, we looked at that a little bit earlier, what that frequency looks like. That's what it is. It's measured in cycles per second. So we can see what that vibration is and account for it, quantify it. Sound created by a piece of equipment is measured in what? It's decibels. So it's a decibel meter. It looks a lot like you have a handheld that you can hold up, and normal conversation, I believe, is around 60. Unless it's me, I speak in a very low voice, and usually I'm around 55, I think, or something like that. Or you can turn up your volume and get a little bit higher. Next slide, please. Okay, 66. Foot-pounds is related to which of the following? Is it weight of feet on the floor? The amount of pressure on a board beam, torque, or moment. Okay. And I like when they follow up with one of the possibles as the next question. Torque is described as force, pressure, a change, or distance. Next slide, please, with the answers. It is torque. Foot-pounds is measured. Which of the following? It is torque. So if you think about a torque wrench, you'll see the indicators on it are in foot-pounds. And that's, if you think about a distance of 1 foot and 1 pound on it, that's a foot-pound. You put 10 pounds on a foot away, that's 10 foot-pounds, right? So it's the torque that you're applying to tightening something up. Torque is described as a force. Remember, we just talked about it as a distance away and a force applied to that. So torque is a force. It's not a pressure, a change. It's not a distance. It's a force. Next slide, please. All right, I like this one. Read the gauge in the diagram at the right and choose the correct reading. And so you can see that this is a 50 is the highest end of the scale, right? And so you can see that it's broken up into the dark components of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. So you have to figure out 50 divided by 5. Those are probably 10 as you go through that. So think about that as we look at the question answers here in a minute. Number 69. If it is necessary to shut down a piece of equipment, right, the electrical system should be turned off for that room. In fact, staff must be notified. Emergency lights needed to be used. Radio communication equipment or pagers must be turned on. Think about the question. It says, if it is necessary to shut down a piece of equipment. It doesn't talk about what type of piece of equipment. Next slide, please, with the answers. The answer is B on this one. The diagram, if you look at it, remember I said it's probably 10 at each one of those, right? You divide it up into 5. So 5, you got 50 divided by 5, it's 10. So each mark is 10. Divisions in between would be another 5. So it's greater than 10 and it's less than 15. So the answer is definitely B, 12. Answer for number 69. It says if it's necessary to shut down a piece of equipment, you must notify the affected staff, must be notified, right? So the piece of equipment could be anything. It could be something in the room. It could be the wing of the hospital, whatever that is, they need to be notified. That's one of the first things you do. if necessary to shut down a piece of equipment. And let's see, Beth, what's the next slide? Is that it? That is it. That is the end of the slide presentation for the day. I think we got a few questions that came up. Beth, you want to read those off for me?
The only question that we had so far in the chat was if they were going to be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint. And I just responded that I would be posting that with the recording of today's session on the website on Monday.
Okay, great. Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I'm glad to see everybody here today. I did put a tie on just for you, so just so you know that. I'm just kidding, just kidding. But I'm glad to see everybody here. Glad that you're able to take this time to practice up for this test. Hopefully, you learn a few test taking techniques, something I've used over time. You know, don't stress it. Try to enjoy it as you go through it the best you can. And just remember those dates. Again, August the 11th is the deadline to register if you're going to take the one in Long Beach. It's on September the 15th. And you do need to register online at the MECH website. And of course, we're up here in Northern California at Fairfield. Definitely, I will be there for that. And you need to register by September 15th, this registration deadline for the Northern California. And that will be October the 20th. I look forward to seeing you all that come to the Northern. I don't think I'll make the Southern one, but best of luck to everybody that attends and takes this certification. I know I've got a group here that definitely will be there as well. So.